Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Remington, a City Council member and Mayor Pro Tem. We're going to call to order our City Council meeting of the whole for Thursday, November 5th. It's now 5:01 in the evening. Our main discussion tonight is about budget. We have 4 items remaining. These are presentations from departments. We have moved that order around a little bit because we believe that the capital projects will take a little bit more time. So we were going to move the storm drainage and citywide capital to the lower part of the agenda, and the top will be the internal service funds and debt funds. So we can get started with good of the order. Does anybody have anything to share? Councilmember Naplin.
Thanks. So I have a couple things. The first one is just kind of going back and trying to figure out where we go from having WAVE come and visit us, if there's any follow-up that needs to be done. And when I think back about that meeting, I think it was great. We got some information. It was a good conversation, but there were quite a few specific questions that were asked, and not all of them got answered. And I don't know if we would expect WAVE to write a written answer to everyone, but I don't know if it would be a good idea to give them an opportunity to just answer some of the questions or request that they, at least try to give some brief information we could provide the community to summarize the questions and some answers. And then I did get an email from a constituent asking about their low income program. And apparently the low income program is only available to new customers. And the concern is there might be people who are really struggling right now, and they wouldn't be eligible to get the low income rate, even though they've dropped into a low income, or maybe they, there's just some extra challenges. And so potentially reaching out to WAVE and asking them if they would consider, extending that to existing customers, or at least creating some kind of a program. I'm not sure. I know Mayor Okerlander has had more contact with them, and so an approach on that.
So, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I can tell that at least at the beginning of the pandemic, they were holding off on people paying their bills, just like all the other utilities have. Their low-income program, it is disappointing that it's not to new customers, but it's also consistent with all the other internet providers. Same thing goes for Xfinity and Comcast, and I believe CenturyLink as well. That said, there might be, I would have to double check. I believe I saw something about something as far as the state program potentially that might be an option, so I can take a look at that. As far as getting written questions from WAVE, I know that they did their best to answer their questions during the meeting. They did get copies of all those questions, but I think from their perspective, my guess would be, who am I responding to, because we did an anonymous survey. So I'm happy to reach out to them and see if they can answer, do kind of a written synopsis of what they talked about, and see if we can get something back for them.
Okay, I think that'd be great, because the community was pretty excited about having them come and took the time to write questions, and a lot of them really didn't get addressed just due to the time constraints, most likely. But
yeah, and I think some of the questions asked are very specific to individual homes as well, and so if I were them, I wouldn't be giving a blanket statement when you don't know what's actually going on with that.
But of the questions that are things that they could really answer, I think that'd be kind of neat.
I'm happy to reach out to Kevin.
And then the other item I already spoke to the mayor about, and it's about working on our legislative priorities, more specifically transportation priorities. And so I'm on the East Side Transportation Partnership, and they are asking for volunteers to be on a little mini committee. I probably only meet once, to put together kind of a proposal for priorities potentially, and then have a broader discussion at the joint meeting that's I think the 17th. But they're asking by Friday if we are interested, let them know if we wanted to volunteer by then. So I'm willing to volunteer to be on that committee, but if anyone has any thing they want to share with me ahead of time, email me. The mayor and I talked about, just kind of carrying forward some of the ideas before, and I really appreciated that idea, just having that consistent message year after year. Anyway, I don't know if the mayor wants to say anything more about that, but there's also SVGA kind of coming up with our legislative priorities and working with them, and then having our own legislative priorities. I mean, there's a lot to work on, so I don't know what pieces people want to take, but it's that time of year.
Yeah. So yeah, we started on transportation. We kind of diverted, but that was good. So I haven't heard from anyone on council since I sent the email a few weeks ago to kind of start prepping for that. But Jennifer pulled up the previous agenda, and we can get that out to council. And then I'm hoping to schedule some time with council to kind of start to talk about like what that last agenda was and what we need to change and reprioritize. And you know, looking at it, I think in general, a lot of the priorities are pretty consistent. So we probably don't need to do a lot of changing. We'll definitely need to do some updating to the broadband section based on what's going on in broadband work groups and legislation. But I'm hoping we can all work together on that in the next couple of weeks. But if you do have transportation stuff, make sure you get it to Jennifer. And then if it's general stuff, go ahead and send it over to me, and we'll get something for review for everybody in the near future.
Thanks, Mayor. Did anyone volunteer to work with SVGA on that little committee? I didn't know if anyone did.
I'm pretty sure I did, but I haven't heard anything recently. But I mean, it should be pretty easy to do. They'll only meet once, I'm sure, before getting that done. ETP will be longer. Be forewarned.
Oh, really? Uh-oh. Maybe I need to rethink that. But
no, it'll be all virtual, so it's not that big of a deal. But you should do it.
Okay, sounds good. Thank
Mayor
you.
Jennifer had mentioned with the cable company whether or not we could talk to them and request they extend the low-income discount they have to current customers. Is that something that that you could talk to them about as mayor?
Yep, absolutely. I can let them know that we're, you know, council members are hearing about it and they want it, and see what they respond. My guess is they're probably going to remain consistent with the other providers, but you never know. So it doesn't hurt to ask.
Good. We're just continuing with our good of the order. I wanted to, before I call on, I see a couple of hands up, before I call on others, just mention that long-term council member Matt Iyer has resigned from city council. He wrote an email formalizing his resignation. I just wanted to take a minute and also allow or encourage council members to say a few words. Matt was just an incredible gift to our city. He's, you know, I believe his family has a long history here. He grew up here. I love seeing folks that went away to college and started a career and they came back home. And that doesn't mean someone's bad because they didn't come back home, but it just warms my heart that somebody said, you know, I grew up here and this is where I want to raise my family. So Matt was really in tune with us as a city. He's always encouraging. He was a straight shooter. I think his background, having worked, continuing to work at City of Marysville, was very helpful to us. His insight, you know, into city operations. He often, you know, spoke, and all of us listened very closely. You know, if Matt felt differently than I did on a topic, it really had to stop and say, you know, I need to rethink this. You know, he was just one of those that took his time to think through topics and speak wisely. So he's going to be sorely missed. We will start a formal process that's on our council agenda tonight to talk about that when we begin, and talk a little bit about all the specifics that go into bringing on a council member. So he'll be missed. Others that might want to speak about Matt briefly? Anyone else? A couple of folks. Councilmember Hogue, and then Councilmember Lingle.
So I appreciated Matt so much. I sometimes felt like he said things that I might have been thinking, and I just appreciated his, you know, honesty during a meeting. I also really appreciate that he's been working so hard at trying to get us to be more efficient during our meetings. And I think we kind of lovingly called him Motion Matt because he was so good at giving motions. But yeah, I definitely will miss him for sure.
Thank you, Michelle. Councilmember Lingle.
I was just going to say that as at this point, the newest council member, I will really miss him. And if we had a way to do it right now, I have said this, I think, is I would have a picture of him in his seat right next to me. He was so supportive, and I'm just really sad that he's gone.
Not gone. Just
That's true. Now he gets to be a citizen.
yeah, Matt, just outstanding husband and father. It's fun to watch him with his family. A joy to be around. Councilmember Lingle, you also had your hand. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Naplin.
I always have so much to say, and yet here I come to a moment where I don't even have the words to express how much we're all going to miss Councilmember Iyer. It's, I wish him well. It was an honor to serve with him, and yeah, I don't even have the words to express how important he was to our group. And I've said this before, where a council is considered a body, and he was such an integral part of it. It's just hard to imagine, going on without, having him there to say. Sometimes he would say what we were all kind of wanting to say, and he would say it, or he'd say something just like Mike Remington, you just said about how, oh, I really need to think about that. That's a different way of thinking about it, and I need to, contemplate it. And anyway, we will miss him greatly, and I wish him the best.
Thank you, Jennifer. Councilmember McHenry.
Yeah, I could echo everything that's already been said about him. Just to add that even at times where we might not agree, he was always so respectful about presenting his opinions in a way that allowed for other people to have their own opinions too. And you guys are right. Motion Matt was such a fun nickname for him because he was always on it, keep the meeting moving. And yeah, he'll really be missed a lot.
Thank you. We're still on good of the order. Is there anything else anyone would like to share before we move on to our regular agenda items? Well, not seeing any hands. I believe Dana Mason, our finance director, is going to take these first two items, the internal service funds and debt funds.
That's right. Good evening, Council. Dana Mason, finance director. Let me see if I can find the right share here. How does that look? Good?
We're looking at.
Alrighty.
Yeah,
so tonight I'm presenting the internal service funds, the building maintenance, and the equipment replacement fund. And the agenda is just, we'll go through department overview, expenditure summary, what's new for 2021, and then questions for each one of them. And I am going to start with the building maintenance fund, so the department overview. It's an internal service fund where costs for maintenance in the city's different facilities are reported and tracked. The fund's main source of revenue is from charges for services that are allocated to city departments based on use and FTE. And then in prior years, capital projects related to facilities were also reported in this fund. And as we've talked about, in the 2021-2022 biennium, capital expenditures have been moved to the new facilities fund. So here's the expenditure summary. And as you can see, 2019 expenditures for improvements were for the depot building, or capital expenditures for improvements were for the depot building and the Doherty House. 2020 estimated includes the $75,000 budgeted for capital maintenance and the budget for Doherty House and depot building improvements. And then services are higher in 2021 due to a $30,000 facility study, which includes $25,000 in carryover and $7,000 for the police building roof repair. So once we do our end of the biennium budget adjustments, this number in 2020 should come down about $25,000. And then the two big one-time costs in the building maintenance fund are a government facility study for $30,000 and then the roof repair for the police building. Are there any questions about that fund? All right, I will just move right on then. So the equipment replacement fund also is an internal service fund that's based on charges for services to each department based on vehicle use. Motorized vehicles or equipment that's over the city's $5,000 capital threshold are tracked in this fund. And then future replacement costs are charged to the department as charges for services over the estimated lifetime of the vehicle. And then average annual costs to repair and maintain vehicles or equipment, including for fuel costs, are also allocated to departments as charges for services. And then here is the summary for the biennium. And supplies include $53,000 in 2021 and $54,000 in 2022 for fuel. And then the big jump in capital outlay that you can see in 2019 was for the purchase of the city's new dump truck. And then transfers out, which are pretty new, are for the to the debt service fund for the state local program loan for the dump truck. And then equipment purchases in 2021, and I apologize, your budget book has the well, I'll tell you about that in just a second. But for Public Works, it's to replace an Exmark mower that was surplused in 2021, to replace a 2005 Gravelly mower, a 2000 crack seal machine, to replace a 2004 Chevy Silverado, and then a 2006 Chevy Silverado. And then replacements for the police department. In the budget book under this fund, there is a Charger, but that was actually purchased this year, so that will be updated with the final version of the budget book. So there's just two vehicle purchases. A 2011 Chevy Tahoe will be replaced, and then a 2016 Ford Explorer. And there's no mandates and nothing on the cutting room floor for this fund. Are there any questions? Let me stop sharing.
Councilmember Naplin.
I always forget, but when we sell items, do they go back into this fund, the revenue?
So
Because
that's a real, yeah. So they go back to the fund that purchased the equipment. So if the equipment was first purchased in, sorry, I'm messing with there it is. Now I can't find everybody. I feel like a little old lady leaning over here. Where are you all? There you are. Yay. Okay.
However they split up the charge for the item originally, those same allocations would give the money back?
Yes. Well, no, actually, that's not true. I think traditionally we've been putting them back in the fund where the purchase was first made. So I guess we would have to think about that. I mean, that's a really good question.
I mean, we don't need to complicate it, but I was just curious. So like if we sold that one police vehicle is what caught my eye, because it's was it a 2015 SUV? I thought, oh, that might be more than some of the stuff that we almost have to give away to get rid of, but yeah. That would just go back to general fund then.
Well, so if it was purchased out of the 501 fund, then it would go back to the 501 fund. But if it was, so if we've been paying in and it was replaced, it would go back to the 501.
Okay, that's actually what I was asking, and I was not clear. I'm sorry. Okay.
Councilmember Langle.
Okay, so in the same topic, since we're now doing these transfers in and out, would it be possible to take the fund that it came from, that was paid back into, and do an internal transfer to offset the cost of the new expenditures that go to that particular department, since everything is fungible?
Yeah, so what would happen, I think, is that the surplus amount would bring down the cost of the vehicle. And
Correct.
so there would still be amount left in the equipment replacement fund. If we're doing it correctly, there would still be an amount. So we
Yeah.
would just subtract that. And then the departments would be allocated the amount of the purchase. I hope that makes sense. Like if we
Yes, it
traded in a car, yeah.
Yeah, so if the new vehicle is 33,000 and we sold something for 10,000, it would be 23,000. We wouldn't lose track of that
Yes.
equipment in that respect. And it would,
Right,
and
we would
it
have to
gives
do
us
a
way to track it in our asset inventory.
Yeah, we'd have to do a little adjustment for future value though. So
Yes. Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So Dana, Mike Remington. So some cities have an equipment rental. So they've walled off this replacement fund. So all the funds that for any vehicle, regardless of department, come out of that fund. We're not there, obviously, but you mentioned the 501 fund. In the 501 fund, is there separate for utility vehicles, separate for police vehicles? How is that set up? I'm trying to remember.
So it's based on use. I think in prior years we may have based it on FTE, but we're doing it on use now. So the police vehicles, you'll see the internal service fund charge for the police department is a lot higher because they have quite a few vehicles. So.
Okay, thank you very. One last question. So
Sure.
I know it takes a while to get all the vehicles.
I'm just going to
on.
close the door here. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Dana. So it takes several years to get every vehicle, every piece of equipment. How close are we to having replacement funds established for most of our items?
Well, so we have $2.5 million in equipment that needs to be replaced. And of course, it doesn't need to be replaced all at once. So the goal is, I think we're underfunded by about $600,000. So I would have to double check, but I'll double check and get back to you on that. And so the plan is to just slowly, we're underfunded by the amount that has been depreciated, I should say, of that $2.5 million. So the plan is to allocate about 5% in addition every year to kind of build that up until we get right size ourselves.
Great. Well, that really answered the question I had, Mayor.
Yeah, I just wanted to add and remind council that previously our existing city policy for the equipment replacement fund says it's supposed to have 200,000 in it at all times. And it was going up by CPI, but it didn't cover the full cost. So this is a really big step towards getting that fund to be self-sustaining as far as, making sure that we're putting the right amount into it each year so that we don't end up in a position again of replacing vehicles that are 15 years old and well past their useful lives. So, so this is a huge step towards actually making that fund sustainable. So I just wanted to remind folks of that.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Dana.
You're welcome. So if you'd like, I will just move on to debt.
Okay.
And I will just go back here.
I was hoping we could eliminate debt, but we probably ought to talk about it.
Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
All right, so our agenda is just expenditure overview, the debt overview, the debt payments, and then the funding sources for debt and questions. And this is just the debt in the debt service fund. This isn't the debt that is in the wastewater or the sewer CIP fund. So here's the expenditure summary. You can see there's just a nominal increase over the prior biennium of about 2%. And this, in the debt service fund, there's 3 different kinds of debts that's paid off. There's the Main Street general obligation bonds that were issued in 2017 with a last payment in 2031. Big Rock, which was also issued in 2017 and has a last payment of 2025, which is also when the levy lid lift expires. And then there's the dump truck state local program loan that was issued in just last year in 2019. And that's last payment is in 2029. And then here's the payments for 2021. We've got, I don't know if you want me to read through, about 185,000 in principal and 57,000 in interest for Main Street in 2021, and then 190 in 2022 and 53 in interest in 2022. Big Rock is 20 in principal in 2021, or 200, sorry, in principal, and then 26 in interest. And then it goes up a little in principal in 2022 and a little lower in interest. And then for the state, the dump truck loan, 11,900 in principal in 2021. My dog really wants in, and 6,200 in interest in 2021. And then 21,000 in principal in 2022 and 5,700 in interest in 2022. And then the sources, so the Main Street is 1/3 REIT, 1/3 REIT 2, and 1/3 street impact. And per the city's bond council, if the bond proceeds remaining from the Main Street improvement are used for facility projects as proposed in the budget, we'll have to adjust the street impact fee. So we may end up using more REIT funds for paying some of the bond debt rather than the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And then for the Big Rock ball fields, that's all paid with the property tax levy lid lift. And then for the dump truck state local program, that's a transfer from the 501 equipment rental fund. And the funds that use, or the departments that use the dump truck, pay into the 501 fund for that debt portion. And that is it. Are there any questions?
Councilmember Langle, and then Councilmember Hope.
What's the interest rate on each of the bonds? I think you've told me this, but maybe all the council members want to hear it.
Let's see. Oh, I did not put the interest rate, but I can find that real quickly. Or semi-quickly. Current debt schedules. Okay, so the interest rate on the Main Street is 2.49%. On Big Rock, it's also 2.49%. And then on the dump truck, it's 1.65432.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Hope had a question?
Actually didn't have a question, but I guess going back to the equipment replacement fund, I'm curious, you said there's $2.5 million, is that right? That
Yeah, I
has
believe
been spent on equipment. Is it like, it must be staggered, right? I mean,
it is staggered. So that's the total future value replacement cost of all of the equipment that's a city that's in the fund. Yeah, that will be replaced, but it is staggered because once you, let's say the dump truck is has a 10-year life. So we divide it up by 10 years. And once we put in enough future value or cost for those 10 years, then the departments don't have to pay any more for that. It just sits in the fund until the dump truck's ready to be replaced. And then we start all over again.
Other questions, council? Dana, just a kind of odd question I'd like to ask. What's our bond capacity for City of Duval? Do we know what that is?
That's a very quick question. I will find out and get back to you on that one because I don't know it right off the top of my head, but I can figure it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, not that I want to go into more debt, but Councilmember Langle.
Yeah, this was something I was going to ask about the legislative priorities, and I don't know how much council is familiar with tax increment financing, but maybe at some point, if council members aren't familiar with it, the mayor could, yeah, it doesn't have to be obviously in the budget process, but I think it's something that council needs to know something about, because it is a legislative priority of the Association of Washington Cities, as I recall, and it is a future tool that we might use for other types of expenses.
Other questions? I don't see any, Dana. Oh, Chief Hurt. Now the questions get tough.
No, not really. Just a quick question, Dana. Is there a prepayment penalty on that dump truck? So I guess my question is, if there was one-time monies that the city had and council decided to use it to eliminate that debt, is there a penalty?
No, I'll find out for you.
Thank you.
That's a good question. So.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Dana. Is that the end? Did you have more slides for us? That's it?
That's it for me.
Great.
It's the Steve show now.
Great, Dana, thank you. So we're going to move on to our last two items. One is the storm drainage fund, followed by our citywide capital projects. Capital projects is a big part of any budget, that usually larger dollar figures, and one that I've heard several questions from council over the last several months. So we'll have Steve Laniszewski, our Public Works Director. Thank you, Steve.
Well, good evening, everyone. Steve Laniszewski, for those who don't know. Let's see, I will share my screen. We'll start with Storm Fund. And push the button. All right. Full screen? Is it full screen?
No.
Yeah, always give me problems. Are you still seeing the split screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Try the reshare thing.
Improvement?
Yes.
Bingo. Now I don't know which screen I'm gonna have to point at to move the slides, but let's try this one. Yes, agenda change?
Yes.
Okay. My favorite standardized PowerPoints for you folks. May be boring, but certainly easy for all of us, especially with multiple departments. It's an overview, FTEs, what's new, mandates, carryover, cutting room, and questions. So starting right at the topic of hand, stormwater, for those who aren't aware, managing surface water. So the lovely rain, snow melt, all the other fun stuff that hits with sleet and leaves and everything else. So 2.92 of the FTEs. And for those who do count to the 100th, these are normally close. Sometimes you'll see the table, it'll be 0.93, 0.91. I tried to keep up with the spreadsheet that Dana has as the master, but it can be off a hair here and there, and it's normally off to the 100th, not the 10th. So for those who like hundredths, 3.97 total FTEs, and that includes others who operate out of the fund, including utility billing and people at City Hall, finance director included. So the system includes at least 60 miles of drainage pipe, 170 treatment facilities, vaults, ponds, bioretention cells, 2,500 plus catch basins. I write plus because every time a plat comes online, we now assume those, unless there is a private system, which does happen sometimes, not all the time. And then the NPDES part, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, so education and outreach, sampling, illicit discharge, monitoring and tracking and reporting. Always exciting stuff. And I had a discussion earlier today about FTEs and whatnot, but Joe, Public Supervisor, and then Gavin is our storm lead, who handles most of the storm for the city and is the lead in that group. Expenditures, nothing overly exciting. Services are up, but we can get to that on the future slide. And in general, don't think infund transfers down. Capital outlay program, we will talk about under CIP, but that is some set asides for some small programmatic work that we aren't exactly sure of what it needs to be, but we know we have culvert replacements, ditch work, manhole repairs that are significant, not just patching a manhole and changing a lid kind of stuff. Staffing changes touched on last week. Excuse me. In general, the only one that really affects this is the maintenance 1 to maintenance 2 conversion, and no technical new staff under this fund. Some of the ongoing new charges which increased our costs on slide 4. So we are utilizing storm drain funds to assist in managing our street sweeping. So with NPDES, storm drain management and cleaning is paramount. The crew does a great job of doing that, and they get through the system, if not every other year, every year. Like this year was full clean. But with the amount of sand we do utilize in the winter and the amount of debris we keep out of the storm drain, the new methodology will be to split our street sweepings with Streets 101 fund as well as this fund. So that's, I think we split about $12,000. So $24,000, $20,000 to $24,000 for the program total. So the street fund pays half and this fund will pay half. Another big bump is system cleaning costs with federal water quality regulation changes. So what we would do, and a couple of you live in a neighborhood which had a decent stormwater management system, when we rent a Vector truck, as we do not own a Vector truck. So we rent one in the summer, which is extremely cost effective, and then we facilitate treating the fluid in the truck with using our existing stormwater ponds. So that is no longer allowed in the sense you have to manage each system. So for example, one neighborhood, let's use Heron Cove. I can't take other neighborhoods' materials and discharge it there, even though that is a qualified facility, meets the standard. You cannot co-mingle sub areas any longer. So what that means is we will likely have to hire out this work because the amount of time and loss of work to fill the Vector truck, drive it to the dump, which is not a standard dump. You have to go to a proper site for decant discharge. We are likely going to have to hire that out. So that is budgeted that way. We wish there were a different way. We can build our own decant facility. That is a different program altogether, and a possibility. I mean, we'll see how next summer goes. Maybe we come up with a different strategy and understand the return on that investment should we decant here and make a facility to decant into. But it is a significant permit to permit a decant facility on top of building one. Sultan actually just built one just this last year. The third share of locate services contract is in this. I skipped one. Pipe system root intrusion. So we do periodically have roots that migrate into the storm drain. They normally come in through catch basins and then travel down the pipe, path of least resistance, and then finding water source. So we do have to eradicate that periodically. There are some neighborhoods that have a very bad root intrusion problem that is not only to do with age and the type of trees that were installed, but also the materials of the storm drain. Developers will tell you we are very strict here. We only allow one style of pipe. It's gasketed. It is a high profile PVC, so it is impenetrable to root growth. But unfortunately, not all of our pipe is that specification. So I know that's exciting the most. We are instituting some small neighborhood projects into this budget as well. And then we have had success the last 2 summers hiring out the goat group to attack the ponds we have that are oversteepened, which are OSHA standard issues for slope and stability. So the goats are great for that. I think everybody's seen, the public goes nuts and actually comes and visits those things every day. So it is functioning really well. They do a good job, and we are hoping through this process to institute that programmatically and annually. Just some of the mandates, and there's some of your storm drain champions. You know, operating and maintaining the storm drain system is a little less difficult than, of course, pressurized water and the toxicity of sewer, but again, it is a massive undertaking. The summer helpers I didn't mention yet, but they do a tremendous job keeping us up to speed on the growth. MPDES, you know, water quality mandates, education outreach, reporting, tracking. It's a lot of work. Those are, you know, I won't call them unfunded mandates because we have a funding methodology put in place with our rates, but we've absorbed a lot of that and are just, you know, making that part of our workload. And I think you all have noticed, if you've been a long time, you know, Northwesterner, the types of rain events certainly are different than they have been in the past. And that is not atypical, but, you know, we're normally a more constant level of rain for longer durations, but now we just get these just deluges, and they come and go. It's like a, you know, when you type your storms 1 through 4, it's like Utah and Colorado stuff. It's just crazy. So we are arriving at different hotspots throughout town. So not only rainy season, but, you know, spring and fall even bring recently tremendous amounts of rain in a very short time frame. So, and then of course grass and blackberries. So I would be reluctant and remiss if I didn't acknowledge their existence, as they participate in a lot of our work. No carryovers per se. So economic cuts. There is a lot of tree removal. We try to assign whatever trees need to go to the appropriate fund. We have something in a park, of course, we're working on the amount of money we have in parks to do that. Same with water, same with streets and storm. We typically run out, but we normally put it on a list to try to catch up when we can. And we have years where we lose more trees than not, and years we don't lose many at all. So that is that. Additional goat support. I mean, we could dump these goats in every pond, but that's just not realistic. So it's not really a cut, but, you know, should we want a program, we could add to it if we wanted. And then staffing is no change. One thing pushed to the future, and we will begin to have these as larger events, but as we clean the system, you know, the catch basins, the pipe network, we don't clean the bottom of our ponds all that often because we don't have a lot of debris going into them anymore, but there is a lot of biomass that you and we can and should and will remove, because as, you know, cattails grow and other things pop up in all of our ponds, they operate and, you know, they offset our displacement, right? These ponds are sized for a certain volume. Those eat into the volume. So periodically we do need to clean to the existing bottom of the design elevation of ponds. So very exciting stuff, but nonetheless, what we do. And with that, that is that in a nutshell. The 404 fund.
Councilmember Napland, and then Councilmember Langle and Councilmember McHenry.
It's crazy. We're all so interested in storm drainage. I don't know. So I have a couple questions. First, I see we're running at a bit of a deficit in this fund. It looks like hopefully I have the right versions, but it looks like we're going in the hole a bit on it. And there really aren't significant capital projects. So I'm just wondering, long-term, are we seeing this fund needing additional revenue? And then the second question is, we're bringing a lot of more high-tech vaults on board. And is there going to be any thought towards reserving some money or setting aside money similar to how we you know, hold money or start setting aside money for equipment or building repairs, things like that. I'm just wondering if down the road we have a liability growing as these age, and you know, really we aren't even bringing in enough money on this fund to just do general routine maintenance on mostly new and nice facilities. So, and then do we need additional training or, you know, to manage these vaults? If we need to do repairs, do we have to hire someone to come in and go down into them? I don't know, just some thoughts. And then the final question I had is more of an idea. I saw in my gardening group this morning, someone posted that in Seattle, their waste hauler offers in the month of November free leaf pickup. And so it's a win-win for everyone because the city doesn't want to have to run around and clean out storm drains because people have nowhere to put the leaves, or I don't know. I mean, it's just an idea. And they did present it as, hey, you know, pick up your leaves. It caused problems with storm drains. And it was, you know, kind of a community awareness, plus you get to get rid of your leaves without an extra bag charge just for the month of November. Anyway, I wanted to throw it out there. I thought it was a good idea. We're negotiating our waste management contract, if it's with Waste Management, whoever we choose as a hauler, but wanted to throw that out there. I thought it was a cool idea.
So a couple of those points, I think the biggest point to consider, and I'm looking at the old budget book, is a set aside for, you know, catastrophic and capital replacement of a storm drain system. I can't remember where I was when this came up, but yeah, 50 to 75 years is the design life of those vaults. The good news is we really have fairly non-acidic styles of water currently. Again, climate change aside, yeah, the less salts we use, the better off we will be. The less acid rain we have, the less corrosion we will incur. So we do have a pretty decent pH and general level of water quality around here. So that gives me some solace that the systems and those facilities will last as long as they're designed to last. But yeah, no, I think we, you know, should strategize on a set aside annually, because we do have a reserve fund in storm, but we also could, you know, just categorically put in $10,000 a year. When they fail, they're not all going to fail at once. But I think I talked about this in, I don't know, whenever Fox Hollow came online, right? It's easy to build them when you are building a brand new neighborhood, but now we have to rebuild and repair in and amongst all the houses adjacent, which we're not there during construction. So our costs are going to be fairly considerable relative to, you know, new installations. So certainly something to consider. Double checking on what you consider the operational deficit.
I don't have my fund balance spreadsheet in front of me. Maybe Dana does. If you could, maybe I compared the wrong things, but.
Just trying to pull that over here. Yeah, and I know some of the transfers are, you know, fully capitalized this year, so that may have a little impact. Was not aware of operating in the red per se, but
I had operations around, or revenue around 850, 890, expenses 930, 973. So.
right.
For the biennium, there's a 54, just the operating margin. There's still plenty of fund balance, but we're using about $54,000 of fund balance. And I think it's mainly due to the Vector. There's an increase in Vector pickup or Vector rental, about 100,000 there. And then there's also the increase into the internal service charges for internal funds charges for services.
Okay.
So
and a couple little capital things are eating into fund balance, I believe, too. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, they would as well, but I think mainly in the operating margin difference, which is what kind of I kind of look at the most part. It's the increase in charges for services.
So is our fee structure supposed to cover kind of some routine capital repairs though? I guess is where I was thinking. Because they aren't necessarily growth related. So is the revenue coming in on storms supposed to cover capital repairs, things like that?
When they're not growth related, for sure.
Yeah, okay. So
And-
it's definitely running in a deficit then, it looks like.
Well, and I do believe part of this, I'll call it program initiation with these small neighborhoods. And for example, the flooding we have on Miller Street in Third Place, I've had to find the $10,000 in the budget to remove from other things to install a catch basin control structure, just to manage these facilities that are substandard and again becoming more impacted by types of events in those short burst durations rather than, it's one thing to move a lot of water over time, but it's another thing to move a lot of water over a short amount of time. So we are finding areas that have that issue. And I think the one visual that if you've all walked, you've walked Mannion Way all the way to the north end, right? The cul-de-sac goes way down. There's a catch basin at the top of the driveway that actually drains back. Right, that grade is, if you're standing in the cul-de-sac, your eye level is at the road that goes into the storm vault. So we're chasing grade. That gets inundated and the vault has been filled. That water has nowhere to go except over the curb line and into that homeowner's home. So that has happened twice already just this fall. So part of this money is to make an alternative to protect some of the properties that exist from the right-of-ways impact. So I don't believe the money would be used every year, but again, if I don't have a set aside and a way for us to compartmentalize it and understand what we're doing, I don't think that's doing anybody a service either. So I think kind of see how it goes. And then Dana, did you say what the ending fund balance was after proposed uses?
Yeah, it is. Stand by. Storm drainage. So it is 699, almost 700,000, and the reserve requirement is 308,000. So there's still a significant fund balance.
So of that bigger number, the 300 reserve number is within that?
Yes, that 600 includes the reserve.
Okay.
Or 700.
Steve and Dana.
So Steve, I wanted to jump on that just for a moment. Do you know how many vaults we have? Large vaults?
Laura,
mean,
I do not know
roughly.
exact. I think we're in we're under 50 in open ponds. So I don't think we're over, this is the Rissa territory.
I was
Can't be
thinking
over
of
20.
underground vaults.
Yeah, but I can find out, but I don't think we're over 20 total.
Yeah. I don't know if it's because of the NPDES. What is that? National Pollution Discharge Elimination,
Right.
something. So a lot of regulations there. I like the ponds for several reasons. One is I consider it a little more natural. You don't have to have a confined space team and a backup team and specialized equipment. All the safety things that go along with air monitoring to go into those vaults. That's expensive. And then of course, replacement is off the chart. One reason I'm bringing it up, we just recently had a joint meeting with the Planning Commission to review a project, and I saw that they had a large underground vault. Nice thing is they're building the park on top, but they had 2.5 to 3.5 acres of property that was wetlands that was right next to it. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why we wouldn't dig some of that out, use that as a place to have all that water drain and naturally drain into the ground. So anyway, I don't mean to review that project. This is a budget discussion, but I realize those huge costs coming up in the future, and I always try to figure out how do we limit those. Now, you just mentioned we had 2 of those overflow. So you know, my answer is always, well, dig deeper. So, but I know life isn't that simple, but I just thought while we're talking budget and storm, you know, where we can, large cities don't have a choice. They put in big vaults. Bellevue has 5,000 vaults of various sizes. And I just watch the issues and the cost, and it's just, you know, the more we can do to have, especially since we have some elbow room and wetlands, the more we can, you know, utilize those where we can. Laura, I saw you had your hand up. I didn't mean to jump into a
No,
issue, but
no, that's okay. Well, it is actually, it's a perfect segue because I did get a question from a council member asking, you know, hey, can we push people more into doing stormwater ponds versus vaults? And I wasn't exactly sure of the answer to that. So I will follow up with Larissa, who's kind of our stormwater guru, to find out, you know, what our ability is, because we're under the King County manual. So I'll check that. I don't know if it would take a policy change or whatever, but I do know that she has reminded me on a few occasions that when you do a pond, you can't dig it as deep as you would a vault. So it takes up a lot more area. And then for Rio Vista, where the park is, that a lot of that area around the vault is sensitive area. So we can't ever dig out a sensitive area to put in stormwater. We've had a lot of people ask that question because they do seem, they're like natural sponges, right? So it makes, it's a little intuitive and makes sense. But we'll follow back up on that question.
yeah, usually when those
Unless
come
Steve knows it, unless Steve knows the answer.
Yeah, Laura hit a little bit on it. And one thing I didn't answer, sorry, Ms. Nathman. Yeah, the crew is trained on storm vault entrance, you know, maintenance techniques, repairs, all that. So there's nothing we can't do. But yeah, to Laura's point and Mike's question on, yeah, you would think that a wetland would be copacetic to have a storm system next to it. That is not necessarily the case. So it is tough to understand, and we can certainly talk more about that because I think, like Laura said, Larissa's certainly the guru, but the policy element is such that sure, we could mandate more ponds. They do take a lot more area. But I think that the issue to consider is, you know, legal counsel when and how our density is calculated. Right, so there might need to be more give and take on that. If a goal was to have more open air ponds, which for everything outside of heat, right, the one good thing about any pond that discharges to a creek, part of the, you know, fish bearing waterways, the colder the water, the better. Underground in a vault does have a significant impact to keeping the temperatures more comfortable for fish, because in the summers, I think, you know, when you hit 70 degrees, that water is deadly for fish. So there's benefits either way. But yes, ponds take significant area. It would be a policy discussion. It's nothing that isn't impossible, but it is a consideration too. And having, you know, open air ponds, the other side effect, which you may or may not realize too, is open air ponds, depending on the embanked amount of fill that it is holding back, takes special permits. So you have to have a dam permit from the state of Washington. There's a lot more regulation that go in. And I'm just thinking of that because of on our hillsides, you know, you think of the consequences of a failure up on a hillside of an open air pond. It can get significant. So I've done 2 very large ones in my career in Utah, and then one more recently in Sammamish. It's that liability, and there's a lot to think about. But I think it's certainly a great discussion. It would be fun.
Thank you for that. Like you say, you know, just the reason I bring it up here is I think about long-term costs, and I know there's a lot more regulations, engineering, safety, all kinds of issues, but thank you for that. I believe, Mayor.
Yeah, I just wanted to say in regards to the sustainability of the fund, you know, we have our stormwater drainage fees that go, you know, are wrapped into our utility rates. But we could, you know, we're finishing up the sewer planning and the water comprehensive planning. So the logical next step would be to look at that storm drainage and look at our rates for that long-term capitalization and putting the money, making sure that there's reserve money in place. So the good news is most of our facilities are relatively new, so it's not an emergency. But once we get the other stuff done, we can put that hopefully in the next biennium budget to start working on getting that fiscally sound as well. We've got a lot of work to do on that end, so can't do it all at once, but we want to get it all done.
Well, we do have a lot of new facilities. That's the good news. I always say it's like having a baby and planning for college. Nobody wants to do it that first few years, but when it comes up, you're so happy you started planning on day one. So I think that's wise. I believe Councilmember Langle and then Councilmember McHenry had questions.
Well, the first thing, maybe for the importance of brevity, just a point on education. It's always been surprising to me in Taylor's Ridge how inconsistent people are in terms of cleaning things like leaves and other debris out of the catch basins. I don't know why that is, but you can't do that when you live in the city because it just causes too big of a problem. So maybe I need a better understanding about what our education strategy is. We have a really good list of homeowners associations. Maybe we need to start explaining that. But two things caught my attention, I guess, is that Steve might want to just address. I mean, he's identified two things that I think are really important. One has to do with the age of the drainage pipe and whether and the type of pipe. And, you know, we've had problems with all kinds of pipe in the last couple of years. And then the second thing he mentioned was how the changing climate, the hard rains, and the discharge around that has created these hot spots. And I guess my question really is, you know, Steve, do you have a gut reaction to what, I mean, it seems, you know, on the surface, it looks like a $700,000 fund balance is a lot of money, but it might not really be. So do you have a reaction to what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, in general, I think the question is, can we normally operate, you know, within the margins? Yes. The hot spots we do have, they are not that many. You know, there are systematically 5 to 10 that come up during events. Strangely enough, you kind of mentioned picking up leaves. I myself have picked up, and I don't know if anybody's noticed, on 275th, right by the new home that was built just south of the Miller's Homestead entrance off 150th. That thing is flooded twice now. All it is just leaves in the gutter. So I've never noticed that before, ever. And I've lived here since 01. So interesting phenomenon happening. I don't know. A couple of the things that we need are culvert based. Not all of those culverts, in my opinion, are fish bearing styles of culverts. So if you need a 30-inch pipe instead of an 18, that's something. Obviously, if we have some fish passage, and that is different. 4th Avenue over by Heron Cove as it drains to Stonecroft. You have Lake Rasmussen. Under Heron Cove, there's a large box culvert. Then you go a couple driveways and there's 24-inch or smaller pipe. And then you go to Stonecroft and there's a nice big another arch culvert. So those bits and pieces in those systems that have, you know, I don't know that quantifies or qualifies itself for fish passage, but some areas of town are going to cost more than others. So to be cognizant of. And I will double check some of the funding because I do know, and Laura was around after I left, they redid some of the stormwater charges. So we do have not only a connection and the capital charge, but we have a growth and acreage charge. Normally that feeds our 409 fund, but I can check on the eligibility of kind of these operational smaller projects that are still capitalized, but so I can check on the funding for that eligibility wise.
Councilmember Bernicki, looks like you wanted to jump in on this storm conversation, and then Councilmember McHenry, you've been patient. I'll call on you next.
Since you all are discussing it so deeply, my question is, because for the first time I've ever experienced, and I'm just curious to know versus the, you know, underground vaults versus our ponds, which there's a pond near my residence, and then I have the wetlands right in my backyard. And for the first time ever, I was actually scared that my yard was going to get flooded because I had never seen the wetlands so flooded in my life before, where it came up into my bottom yard. Water, my yard was turning into a lake. And my thought is that with I'm just wondering how all that discharge works, if it's better through the stormwater ponds. Can we filter it faster through the vaults? Are they equal? Or, looking at the future, hopefully we don't get that kind of rain anymore, because that was a little frightening.
That's a great question. And I think if that was earlier in the year rather than the spring, was it in the springtime instead of the fall?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
it was when we had that massive rain.
Well, Councilmember McHenry, I think, can attest. What we had in there were beavers.
Oh, in our wetlands?
Between you and, I know it's Sierra by its definition in development. I can't remember the name of your neighborhood, Councilmember McHenry, but yeah, we had a beaver in there. So beaver management is a real thing, interesting and fun as that sounds. Where I came from, we had a line at $20,000 to $40,000 a year for beaver management, and it's trapping and removing beaver lodges, and it's crazy. Once they get here too, it's hard to get rid of them, and they do cause havoc. They fill the culvert right under the pathway in there, and it raised that entire area over a foot over the pathway. So that's exactly what happened. So. Yeah, stormwater. And then to your other question, no, every neighborhood in one way, shape, or form is different depending on what era they were built in, which is very hard for people to understand. We cannot detain for every event. So the older the subdivision, the smaller the storm and duration, right? A 2-year storm or a 10-year storm with a 2-year peak or a 24-hour. There's so many combinations. 25-year storm with a 2-hour peak. There's so much, and they are all essentially different unless they were built around, and not only built, but Laura, what's the term? Whenever they vested to the code at the time. So they may be newer to us visually, but they may have been vested to an older code, but depending on when they were platted. So yeah, they all vary, which is very difficult because your pond's gonna act differently than the Heron Cove. Heron Cove's gonna act differently than Toll Brothers. They're all different. So.
Okay, and so is the beaver gone?
I'm not at liberty to say.
That's safe. I wouldn't say either. Councilmember McHenry, you've been real patient. Thank you.
Well, my question is about goats, but I do want to talk about the beaver for 1 second to answer your question. That backup happened on the pond side, and I don't think that would have affected your backyard, Diane. But anyways, the beaver's still around. There were other, mitigation efforts. So we're living in peace at the moment. So my question was about goats, and knowing that we have more parks coming online, and goats have a specific purpose, so we can't use them to edge grass in a park or something like that. So in your mind, do you have more plans to expand using goats for other things to free up people to actually work more maintenance that needs to be done by a person?
Yeah, I think that would be the part of the balance, because the most of, even though they're all fenced, they're not perfect, and they do need additional fencing to mitigate their escape. But most of our ponds can be fenced or slightly changed by the consultant and her team. So yeah, they can lock them in and they just go to work, as you've seen. So I think as we do come online, and it's a funding balance, because yeah, we can do more hand work with summer helpers and park staff at some point, rather than yeah, we can't put a goat in the field. We could, but it'd be really goofy, and
you'd have another problem then.
Yeah. But no, they have begun serving a great purpose, and there are more small outfits popping up here and there. So it's I'm sure going to become more mainline as far as what you see out there.
Okay, thanks.
Until they unionize.
Great. Any other questions on who knew storm drains and all was such a big budget discussion? Thank you. Steve, I think we're ready to move on now to our last item. That's our citywide capital projects. So
And
Steve, and council. It's 6:11. We have roughly, I'll call it 45 minutes. I might even try to say 40 minutes so we can all take a 10-minute break. Usually our rear ends can last about 2 hours and call it good. I want to give us a little more time before we go to council. So Steve and council, if we don't get through this topic, we'll move it to our next council discussion on budget. I believe our next one is wide open. All we have is discussion. So I don't want folks to feel rushed. You have to cram it all in if we don't get it all done.
You bet. And then I guess full screen, is that online?
Yes.
Okay. So before we intro this, I want to steer everybody to don't look at Steve for a capital program. This is citywide, finance was involved, Laura relative to, admin and the mayor, of course. So we all will be participating. And I say that to them as much as I am council members, what they should expect on results and responses here. But I think I've had a couple council members ask it. Yes, it is a fairly ambitious program. I don't believe all of it will obviously transpire in the biennium, but they all are relative and they all have, program, project, and those types of merits. So we will introduce them and chat as we go, I would imagine. But you guys let me know if we want to kind of run through things, or maybe like after each type of project list, maybe we talk at each one or wait till the end or whatnot. I'm game, and like you said, Mike, we got time and more nights, but I know this is an important topic. So
Steve, Mike Remington, I would suggest that after each one of those, we just simply ask. I know it's a presentation, but we're also in council discussion. So I think it's helpful to pause after each one just to see if there's specific questions about that budget item. I think that's where it's most helpful.
All right. So, okay, capital projects. In general, greater than $5,000. They do mean a little bit different. They're kind of defined differently in my mind relative to capital when it reflects, a capital project that's maybe growth related or a capital project that's O&M related. So they, in my mind, they're all a little different, but as defined, they're greater than $5,000 for a capital investment. Yes, this is ambitious. How will we get it all done? Well, we won't, but we will try and we will prioritize and we will move on. And some of it is duplicative and program related, like the I&I we'll get to later, but there's 3 separate listed projects, but they are in line to happen in progression. So we won't get too overwhelmed. There we go. And I should say too, we do our best to try to combine, the bottom bullet here, not only combining similar work, but combining funding to cobble together to get a project like 142nd, where, yeah, it's going to have some storm features, which we've known about. So storm has some money set aside for it. Obviously the grant, sidewalk element, and the expansion of that system. So all in all, we always try to make sure every group who's participating is paying their fair share, because let's face it, if we didn't have those approaches, we wouldn't get a lot of things built, as well as obtaining grants. Oops. So facilities, this is a big one, and I'm sure it will generate lots of questions, comments. And this was really a strategy of the group of, prior to understanding how we would fund it, like what's the list of need, irregardless of how we fund it. So we developed it to start, what the need is. We did the big inspection package last year. We've picked off some of the low-hanging fruit on roof replacements and structural and electrical work. So these are the items that are left, aside from the first one. So I'll kind of skip the wastewater treatment plant office first, but City Hall, the windows, painting, and HVAC, the building's at its service life for pretty much all of it. We are looking at the HVAC assessment that Sean's doing out of the last council meeting or 2 ago. So that's underway. Separate from this, but we understood HVAC was already a concern as it existed. Then the police department, 10-year service life. It's now in year, 18, Carrie, or whatnot. So inside and outside paint, HVAC in there itself, which I think maybe has had some upgrades between now and when we started this budgeting process. So maybe that one can be adjusted as we go. And then flooring throughout the building. And then stepping up to the first item, so the wastewater treatment plant office and garage room model. So if you're mad about that, I will take responsibility. As we have been stressing, understanding how we're all going to function, even prior to COVID, I know Laura, with community development group being planning and building, it is important for them to be together. Well, for those who do or don't know, it is just as important for planning to be with Public Works and building to be with Public Works, because we work hand in hand with inspections and issues throughout town. So kind of the thought, since we don't have a great short-term or mid-term strategy for capital city facilities, nor a real long-term, that does need to be a priority as the city itself. But I thought, we have a building here which is severely underutilized. We're always going to own the property. We're always going to own the structure. We're at capacity at City Hall. I don't even know where they're all going when they move down there. So I kind of threw this at Laura. She thought it was a fine idea. We talked about it with the mayor. She thought it was a fine idea. And for the cost and the bang for the buck, it's a 10-year plan that will likely last as long as we need within that 10 years for sure. Can it last longer? Maybe. Can it transition to something else when we're done and we have some Taj Mahal City Hall? I mean, sure. But in my mind, any larger facility anywhere else is just way out of reach. And we have so much work and the staff that need to communicate, albeit with, the one positive out of COVID is how we all connect. So like this, staff can connect virtually, but there is a lot to be said about everybody being in the same place. I mean, whatever project it is, whatever stage it's in, somebody in engineering is communicating with planning, somebody in planning is communicating with building, somebody in building is communicating with us, and so on and so forth. So I had our architect kind of look at the facility, talk about some base numbers. The shell is freestanding, the trusses are full span. Like, this can be a shell, it can be gutted. And I think I talked to Dot today. The office I'm in here, for crying out loud, it's 250 square feet. This should be well more utilized, the square footage we have. So that's the thought, to expand into the garage, gut this thing, have somebody who does space design, help us out and get a real facility that can house community development, planning, building, as well as Public Works and engineering all together. So that is how that arrived. And then the funding of that, Dana can certainly engage in, but it started with trying to kind of put the Main Street 306 fund back to where it came from, since we're about done and it had that large fund balance. And Dana doing her due diligence as usual, right? Oh, it just wasn't water, sewer, streets, and storm money. It was remaining bond funds that were sitting there. So that's kind of how that transpired into those items, and those need to be installed on a capital improvement list, and they are eligible. But that's kind of facilities in a nutshell. So moving on to, I kind of skipped this slide and already put it in words, but improves the facility we own. We are down here on Main Street. We do have a fine structure that could be severely enhanced to house everybody. Parking example, it's downtown, continuing parking downtown. It should be for City Hall and businesses. So putting a lot of workers down there is not very conducive to success. We've operated at a City Hall long enough. We know the arguments. People don't like us taking parking, and we are a partner, but we understand, they need to sell whatever widget by whatever store, they need parking. So it kind of helps free up some of that, and it frees up a ton of space at City Hall. In the budget is the administrator, and you've got other elements that need to happen down there too. So it was a pretty good problem solved in my mind. So, I think that's it before we jump into streets. So I think we opened up the floor on facilities, and Dana or the mayor, do you want to say anything before you kind of open the door here?
I'll just say that, you know, it's a really creative idea to get some of this work done, and we're at a point where we just can't afford to wait any longer, especially if we move forward with the with some of the proposals in the IT ILA. We're going to have an office space for that IT person that's here 24 hours a week. And I can say when I got to the city as mayor, IT was working out of the kitchen in City Hall, and that's just not an appropriate place for people to be working out of. So until we get the capital facilities plan done and move forward with designing and building a new building to accommodate everyone, this is really where we're at a point where I believe strongly we need to take this interim step and make sure that we have the space for our employees that we have today while we're working on that long-term planning.
Sorry, questions from council members? Councilmember Langle.
Well, Steve and I have talked about the CIP from many directions. There's a bit of a conflict for me in understanding the investment in the Public Works building, which I think makes sense, and the idea of this long-term planning for a city hall. And so a part of that conflict is not really understanding what the scope of work would be for this facility study. And I think I would need more information on that so that I would understand better what this long-term thing is. I think if the investment in the Public Works building is with the understanding for everyone that we are not building a city hall for 10 years, there might be some additional planning in, I don't know, year 7, 8, or whatever. But if that's the understanding, that's really one type of budget decision. Another type of budget decision is thinking this is, I don't know what short-term means, but is understanding what short-term or even medium-term is. It makes sense to me to invest in the Public Works building. And having done a building or two, there's a lot of different ways people do it these days. I mean, they don't necessarily put in a lot of walls, and they invest more in the kinds of space planning that is more adaptable to the number of employees you've got and the workflow and a whole lot of things. So there are a lot of advantages to this building because of the way it's built. And so that's why I'm very interested in this project. I also think about our facility needs long-term, not just as one building, but you know, there are other ways that public services are coordinated. I remember very specifically Laura saying that the mandate for a 10,000 person city was that these kinds of permitting functions be in one place. It's not a mandate to have a brand new city hall. Now, that doesn't say that a brand new city hall might not be desirable or financeable, but we are asked right now to make a decision about the Public Works building. So that's what I've imparted to Steve, and I would need to know more about what the facility study is about and how that intersects with this decision. So I understand exactly what I'm agreeing to in terms of the long game, because investing 600,000 and planning on building a city hall in 5 years doesn't really work as well. So I guess that with respect to the other facility things, I've been vocal. They're long past due. And if the bond program is easy fit for that, then it makes sense to me to do those. And so that isn't really a question, but it is a statement. I mean, Steve's been great in answering my questions, and he's done a good job of sharing what he told me. So understanding the long game is more important to me on the Public Works building.
Other input on facilities? Mayor, and then Councilmember Hoag.
Well, I just wanted to ask the police chief to discuss a little bit, this will give council some context of where we're at and where we have been as a city as far as some of these facilities. And I think that Chief or Steve might be able to give some insight into the building when the police station was purchased and built, how much that cost and how long it was supposed to last and where we're at today. Because, you know, we need new facilities. We need everyone in one place, but we're just at a point where we can't afford to not move forward with the space for the employees that are coming on board before we get to that point. And there was a significant investment made in the police building. So do one of you want to kind of share a little bit of that background and history?
I can certainly try. You might know a little more than I do, Steve, but it was put in place in October of '04 as a 10-year facility, temporary 10-year facility. I believe it was levied at 1.8 million, Steve. I could be wrong. When they put that in,
I believe that might have been the total development cost, not necessarily, yeah. But I think that was,
yeah. So it was 04. So we're going on, we're coming on up to 16 years for sure. And by no means are we disappointed or not appreciative of what we have, but it is deteriorating. We have some flooring problems that can be fixed. They're not devastating. We have an HVAC system that really needs to be replaced, and every time something goes wrong, we learn that the original installation was shoddy at best. We've had recent things with COVID. You know, we've had to shut our HVAC off because it was installed in a way that it brings air in from the outside. So when the fires and the smoke and all that from the smoke from all the fires and stuff was actually bringing that smoke inside, we actually had to send employees home on days off with pay just to make sure their health was good. We have rats again. Lots of things going on. I'm not trying to create devastation. There are things that can be fixed, but if we're going to be in this facility, or if the facility is going to stand, you know, for another 5 or 10 years, it needs some work. And again, a lot of it is cosmetic. You know, if you expect your employees to take pride in their job, then you need to take pride in the facilities that they work out of. Go ahead, Steve. I'm off my soapbox.
No, I hear you too, and the rats are an enigma. There's inspections in bait, and I don't know if they're now a super rat. I mean, it's crazy. In the attic, I don't know, you know. So they're no fun, but doing something is yeah. And that's all I had to say. I agree with Chief. You got to start somewhere too, and we do have some planning to do. And I don't know if Laura or the mayor wants to touch on the planning element, but that would be next, in my opinion.
Councilmember Brudnicki has a question.
Oh, I just want to comment that being around for over 10 years now, and one of the priorities to me is definitely our infrastructure, our facilities, you know, to keep government running at the best level that it can run for our citizens. So I definitely support maintaining the facilities. I would say, yes, we should definitely craft some sort of long-term plan for down the road for expansion. And I think being creative and innovative about how that happens with our limited land or space that we have is something we should really work together to think about all the different ideas or options that are out there for expansion for the future. We're going to expand. It's going to happen. So let's not pretend like that's not going to happen. in the meantime, we have certain needs that need to be addressed, and they should be addressed. So I'm in support of what staff says they need to do to fix those problems and make sure that we are operational at the level we need to be to serve our citizens. That's all.
Other questions? Laura Thomas and then Councilmember Hope.
I was just gonna say, you know, Steve, when he came up with one of the solutions, which was obviously updating the wastewater treatment plant and taking up and utilizing that space better, I really did and still believe that that's a really good idea for that short and midterm, because we do need to look at our long-term planning for facilities. All of our structures are aging. Most of them haven't been painted inside or out for almost 20 years, carpet, windows, HVAC. And we're just at a point where all of the facilities need work. And we're just talking about the facilities that we have people working in. And I do agree with, and I want to share that sentiment that Carrie shared, which is, and it's not to complain, but when you have a decent workspace and office, you feel better, you're more productive as a worker. And we're starting to, we're starting to hear complaints, quite honestly, about, what our buildings look inside. Our heat system was up and down for over 2 weeks in City Hall. So you would come in and it would be 50 degrees inside, and it took a while for that to get repaired. We really are at a point where we have to look at a midterm solution while the city and the council are looking at a long-term solution. And, we do live close to a river, so I think we're always going to be chasing vermin. We've had vermin issues even at City Hall. So I don't know that that's going to be different no matter what building we have, except for to make them tighter. But I just wanted to share that. I thought that the solution that Steve came up with was a good short and midterm solution. Thank you.
Councilmember Hogue.
I like this creativity. I hadn't even thought about this. So when COVID hit, I was thinking to myself that it was kind of nice that we had multiple buildings, because then we could keep our staff in different buildings and they could continue working without being at risk of exposing each other to COVID. So I kind of was starting to kind of think, well, there's, maybe there's some advantage to what we currently have. And as we've gotten used to using Zoom, you don't have to be in the same building to have a meeting. You can have a Zoom meeting. That's something I thought of, but I do know that we need a more long-term plan. And it's, we probably need, I think this is a good solution in the middle. In the meantime, one question I have is, if we do build a big city hall somewhere, what would happen with this building that we put $660,000 into it? Is there still a use for it?
Yeah,
That would be my
great question, and I can't see it being a bad investment. We're always going to own the property. We're always going to have the plant. At some point, maintenance-wise, does the crew move in here? Do we keep a yard downtown? I'm going to tell you, with redevelopment and probably past the medium term, 10 plus years, downtown will redevelop. We will probably be forced out. I was just talking to a friend who actually was Joe, our supervisor. He went to the Redmond area over by, the southeast side of Marymore, right? You got all the tilt-up buildings in there, storage units, Mac and Jack, all of the little pubberies. And one of our suppliers for water parts is moving to Idaho. The cost is 20%, and they'll have increased trucking costs, but it's so much cheaper because that, the Redmond sub-area plan that's adjacent to the park with the rail coming, they're already starting to migrate all of those businesses out. So change will happen. So yes, I would see the vision of like public works operations coming down to this facility. Who knows what else in the future, whether it's parks and those types of other programs kind of spur off at some point, right? Who knows what it'll be, but it'll probably be more than it is today. So I do see the facility being utilized and not certainly mothballed.
So it won't be a waste, money thrown out the door. I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
no. To I think Councilmember Brunicki's, I don't want to go against the word, but you know, if this does happen, we do have a facility to go move into, right? The alternative is moving some trailers. You work outside while they're tearing it apart. But you know, we have a couple buildings we could occupy in the interim while we are also deciding on those facilities. And yeah, I think a facilities plan is paramount because, like I said, you have an aging police structure. Every other building needs work. We have other buildings maybe we don't keep. And then, you know, we have a 2-acre pad on the toll project coming to you folks in, you know, less than 24 months. So there's a lot to consider, and the intent isn't to throw this at this group to scare anybody. It's just, you know, timing is what it is. Yeah, it's not on the CIP and we need to program that work in, but it seemed reasonable as we were all terrified about segregating the operations of, you know, building and public works, and then, you know, being further away from that group, and honestly not being involved with Laura. We need to communicate daily. We don't always get that opportunity because just because you have Zoom doesn't mean you get to use it. I waited 3 hours today to get a hold of Dana. I mean, you know, so everybody's got stuff happening with their own groups. So, you know, there you go. Good question.
Councilmember Naplin.
So I also thought this was a creative idea and something I am excited to talk more about. But it's just the timing of the capital facilities plan. Is it possible we could try to get a capital facilities plan to integrate this as a potential midterm solution, and just kind of try to have that as be part of what we have someone help us with space planning? I don't know, it just feels kind of weird to do something like commit to something like this and then do a capital facilities plan that may, you know, provide more information that would have informed something. Because if this, like you said, does end up being something that gets used for other things after a larger facility is built, you know, having that consideration before we remodel, I feel like is important. Secondly, do we have enough parking in the area for employees? It feels like when we have any type of meeting there, it's really tight just to have a few extra people come.
Yeah, it's certainly tight. It can be reorganized to some extent. You know, there is on-street parking across the street. Some of us will have to commit to parking there, which is fine. We have other space internally to this facility, but it's not always easy to get up from down below. You know, so yeah, it's something to consider as well. And that would have to be part of the planning process.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to a budget is, you know, not, we're signing on the dotted line, we're doing this project. For me, if we leave this in the budget, I guess I would want more work to be done to flush the idea out and consider parking, or, I mean, I assume we have rules about how many parking spots we need, you know, as a part of a permitting planning process. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm interested in the idea. I'd like to see it as part of the capital facilities plan as an interim solution, and kind of how that might work into a longer term plan, a better idea on cost. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about how costs can change over time and the importance of having, you know, really strong pre-design estimates, you know, really trying to understand the actual cost before we start heading down the line to where, you know, we might get to the end of the design where we spent, you know, $50,000 and realized, oh, I don't know if we would have done this if we would have known it was going to cost this much. So yeah, anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I think the group, admin can strategize on what that plan looks like and timing and get back to you folks at the next meeting too. Does that sound about right, Laura and Mayor?
I guess it's not just that I want more information in the next couple weeks. I think the type of information I would need, would be integrating it into more of having, it part of the capital facilities plan before we start, aggressively moving forward with this.
Councilmember Lingle.
Yeah, I just want to observe something as, again, if I have a better idea of the scope of work around the facility study, it would help a lot in this decision. But there's another consideration, which is that the current proposal is to use bond proceeds. Bond proceeds really have to be used within the next 3 years. So if this is something that we want to do with bond proceeds, we really have to consider the timing of that as part of this discussion. Because even with having an existing facility, Public Works is going to have to move relatively quickly if they're going to do the remodel. And so, an extended planning around this particular type of project, if we're going to use bond proceeds, there's a bit of a rub there on the timing, and that is separate, I guess, to some degree from funding source. So that's definitely something I was looking at when I made my earlier comments, because it's been presented as a project with the bond proceeds. And, I still have questions about the bonds and timing and to make sure everything gets done within 3 years. The other part of that is we could potentially have the bond money spent within the 3-year period if we're really disciplined about whatever kind of planning we do around short, midterm, whatever we want to define it, facilities. As long as we're disciplined about doing that over, I don't know how many months, then it potentially still all works with bond funds if that's how we want to use bond funds. Then the last thing I would say is, big picture facilities planning, like a new city hall or, building a new police station, whatever that might be, that really dovetails with the bigger picture need of understanding our financing. That was the issue raised about what our bond capacity is, how much money we need to save for some of those things. And in that respect, there's sort of a whole other piece of planning that goes along with it. But I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that the current proposal is this being done with bond proceeds. And I guess the follow-up question would be, if we're not going to use bond proceeds for this, do we have a resource for this? And how would we use bond proceeds? So there's a bunch of stuff that is really moving parts on doing this, even if it's a great idea. So we got to figure it out, and we have to, I think, figure out our strategy pretty quickly.
Councilmember Brunicki.
So from past experience, again, I'm going to just say that such large projects really do require a lot of investment of time and planning.
Yeah. And
I guess thinking about all the maintenance that has to get done that has not been done. And, as a homeowner, for example, I would never let my house get to that kind of disrepair, never. And, as thinking as someone who's representing the citizens and our responsibility to manage the dollars, the investments, these buildings, these facilities are investments, and we can't really wait or hesitate, or if we're not sure, I think I'm really encouraging folks, please, then do the extra research that needs to get done to understand. But we can't keep putting this off, and we're right now working on the next biennium. So this would be the time where we really want to commit to the investment and to serve our citizens, do right by them, to apply this investment so that we can manage the city and we can conduct our services to the highest level possible. And, you know, I just think we need to treat this as a priority. So.
Councilmember McHenry.
Sorry about that. So first I wanted to start by saying I like this idea and I support it. I think it's a good idea. My kind of side question, I suppose, is, sorry, I don't know this offhand, but in terms of the capital facilities plan, is that something still proposed to use, for example, a contractor to fulfill that? I don't know who that question would be for, Laura.
Yes, I can answer. Yeah, to do the formal capital facilities plan, just like what was included in this current biennial budget, where we've gotten half of it, and that's the building inspections. It is having an outside person come in and help us do that planning. You know, we really don't have the capacity in-house, and having an outside expert come in, I think will get us to the better result.
Well, I guess where I was going with that question was that, you know, there was talk, you know, a couple years ago about staff having the expertise to be able to complete it in-house. I understand what you're saying about workload, not allowing for that. But where I was going with it was that what I'm hearing from staff now is this is a good thing to be putting money into. This is a good first step for improving our facilities. And so knowing even if we use a contractor to fulfill that facilities plan, that staff will play a huge role in working with that person and giving them information, that I feel comfortable supporting this at that time.
Mayor, I recall at our meeting earlier, and then I'll call on you, Laura, that we had talked about rather than moving it to our next budget meeting, that we could actually just extend this discussion into the council tonight. Do you have a preference, Mayor?
I don't. My family is supposed to head out so the kids can do school from Eastern Washington tomorrow. But I, you know, if council wants to continue this discussion tonight instead of waiting till the next meeting, that's fine.
Council, how many would like to continue this discussion? Just move it into council and we'll just continue with Steve. How many would support that? It looks like the majority support that. So Mayor, we'll go ahead and move the rest of our discussion. Steve, I appreciate that from you. Chief Hurt and then Laura, and then we'll wrap it up.
I just had a quick comment and I wanted to tag on to what Councilmember Bernicki was saying. You know, if the city's going to invest, you know, close to $1 million, regardless of where the money comes from, they really need to make sure that they're considering the continued investment and through manpower. I don't know if Steve's folks have the bandwidth. Maybe if we're going to spend this kind of money and upgrade these facilities, then we certainly need to spend the money to put a 0.25 or 0.5 FTE in place to make sure that this investment is continued to be monitored, because it could be another 10 years. And so we need to make sure we have someone in place that is maintaining this investment. And I don't know if Steve has the bandwidth right now, but if he doesn't, then we need to be, that needs to be a part of this plan. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Laura?
I was just going to say, I want to make sure that we don't confuse terms of capital facilities plan and a government facilities plan. The capital facilities plan is a comprehensive plan process, and we are currently coming through the docket process where this project would need to be added to it, because if we don't, it's not eligible for expenditures through REIT and through the remaining dollars from the Main Street project. So I just want to make sure that we understand the difference, and to put it on the capital facilities plan to do the element, that is easily done by staff. Honestly, it is a best guess. You know, there's a description that'll go with it, and we try to estimate, you know, what that cost will be. And we have to try and estimate it pretty tight, because that's all that will be eligible. Like, we can't go over that amount without adjusting it. But I do know that it is really important that we continue to move forward with the government facilities plan and analysis, And I think we need to come back with maybe a timeline of that plan and investment in doing that and moving that forward. That was all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So we'll move this discussion to the proper place at our city council meeting. With that, we'll adjourn our cow, and we'll see you at 7 o'clock at our city council meeting. Thank you, everyone.